an opportunity to review the agenda, and I'd like to make a motion to accept or sell.
So moved. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Mike? All opposed? Give my Robert rules of order over there. Nay, ayes have it, unanimous. Regarding the minutes, has everyone had a chance to review? Okay. I point out just a couple of things on here, and at the very end, page 8, I believe it is, agenda items. So Mary Jenkins, we've removed that. GIS, we moved that to November.
Just clarification, it's not GIS, it's mooring info is the name of the company.
Okay.
They'll be showing us where the moorings are, and I think that's where the GIS term came from.
Got it. Okay. So if you make two corrections in that, we're moving them to November, and it's the correct line.
Yeah, would I correct it on this, or because this was what we decided last
Yes.
meeting?
Yes.
So change it for last meeting, or change it for this?
So the no problem.
I would change it, I would do it for this,
Yes. In a
this,
minute.
yeah, for this one,
Yes, and then it'll appear in the next month's agenda.
right,
Okay? It's new business.
yeah.
Okay? And then on the last page, on follow-up,
Yeah.
ongoing issues. So the last three items, the bullets, Keith Wallow asked about pilings, I believe that one is resolved. As are the last two items regarding the grant money issue, as well as the money set aside for the dredging at the Maritime Center. I cleared that with Nancy Holt, that $90,000 is no longer there. Okay? That being said, I'd like to make a motion to accept the meeting minutes from September 5th.
Can you stop for a moment?
You absolutely can, Michael.
So the 90,000 that was there, it's no longer there.
That's correct.
So where does it go from there?
It was never real revenue, so to speak. It was $90,000 credit issued
Yeah.
internally, but not issued. It was $90,000 that was identified as potential to be issued. It was never issued, so
Oh, it's
therefore.
never issued.
Correct.
Okay.
So therefore, and it was, I believe that was back in 2012, maybe,
Okay.
that it was originally created.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
Any other questions on the meeting minutes from September? Okay. Then may I make a motion then to accept the minutes from Wednesday, September 5th?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, passed unanimously. Okay, let's head right over to the agenda for this evening. Finance report, Steve?
The river dredging update, everything has been filed with registry of deeds. I did the last filing Monday. So Christine Clare has all the documents she needs to start the bid package and that bid process. And I'll be meeting with her and Mike DeMayo, I believe it's the 15th of this month, to go over the bid documents, to get those out into everyone's hands in all the bidders.
Okay, and that's for Sector A, correct?
Yeah, South River Dredge Project, Section A.
Section A.
Yeah, which, when you come in the South River, in the New Inlet, and you make the left-hand turn and go down the South River, that area right there. And that's what we're talking about dredging.
Okay, and my understanding is that Marshfield has a warrant October 15th, where they anticipate that their side of the money will be approved.
That's what I've been told as well, that they're anticipating their portion of the funding will be on, it is on the warrant, is what I'm told, and it should be.
And according to Nancy Holt, our funding is already
We-
set, ready to go.
Our funding is in place.
Correct.
We are ready to go.
So we're just sitting on Marshfield to approve. If they do, then we're ready to release
The
and go.
documents in.
Okay. If successful, Marshfield that is, and the RFP, what do you expect a start time on the dredging?
I think now we're into like December.
December.
Yeah. There's a time of year restriction, I think it's February 1st, February
Is that the
15th.
winter flounder, or
Yeah.
just keep on guessing that one?
It's the winter flow.
Okay.
We just got another one information.
No, that's quite all right. Tucker's gonna fill us in on that.
So that's where we stand there, so that project's moving along quite well.
Okay, great. Any questions?
And so the engineering is all done, and do
Engineers,
they give you an estimate or not of what,
no,
yes, it's only what the people bid, right?
what they did.
Well, they give you a cubic
Cubic yards.
yard.
Of how much material is,
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot of companies are working right now, it's not like things are quiet. Not quite sure what's going to come in at.
And if it's over what we have approved, we can do it.
What we can do, we can just stop
So,
it,
do less, oh, do less.
just stop when we're not
And
on.
it's getting dumped out in Gloucester or something out there, where's that dumping?
On
ground?
that day. I don't know the exact location. Mass Bay Dumping Grounds.
Any other questions? Great.
Cole Parkway Marina Project. That's moving along. We're still in the midst of litigation.
Nothing.
For, not,
So my understanding from meeting with Jim Bordeaux is that we've made our filings with the DEP, and we're in wait mode to find, we're in a wait
whether
period on that.
DEP,
Right.
yeah,
So therefore,
the attorneys have been talking back and forth.
correct. So,
That's all we're waiting on is the Mass DEP approval.
right,
If that goes out, if it gets approved and done, then we too are ready to go. The final drawings have not been drawn up yet because we don't know the exact location of the drainage.
so these are in invisible ink right now? these final ones?
They're in invisible ink.
Good.
Yeah.
But the engineer will make those corrections, and it's my hope that it gets approved quickly, and then we also would go out to bid, and I would anticipate a start date of, the 1st of March, and completion date of May 15th.
If I remember from CLE's earlier estimates, which would,
Well,
it's
it's
about a
GEI,
GEI, I'm sorry.
a lot of acronyms.
Yeah, I was about to try to guess the guy's name. So,
Erosion.
him too. If I remember correctly, he was talking 4 to 6 weeks-ish for the
Yeah.
length of the project,
Yeah.
assuming on weather conditions, correct?
Yeah, and when it goes out to bid, and it, we then would have to draw up the contract, and then that would have to go before the board of selectmen, and they would have to approve, sign off on it. Then we would, sign then to the contractor. The contractor would then start to order materials, pilings,
Mhm.
and they, it's not like a stock, something just laying around. Order the length, size, and that takes a little while. So that would be done and scheduled so that they come in, we don't have 60 pilings laying around Cole Parkway. You get, X number per day or week, so it's ready to go. The gangway has been ordered. The gangway company, I think I reported that last
Maybe
page.
you minor
Here.
modifications or something.
And that's, going very well. The electrical work would also go in at the same time. That has to be updated at the Parkway Marina.
So this is just pilings, it's not changing the footprint of the marina at all?
It's just pilings. Just adjusting the location of the marina and how it's
So it's not.
It's ending it in one spot.
cleaning that.
Yeah.
Steve, did know if any engineering concerning Dave Daphne is concerned about that one corner, I forget what they called it. Did they do any depth studies there, do you know, in that
We
corner?
just, the only thing we did was, we went out, we had Barge come in, and Barge drove preliminary exploratory pile drives.
Right.
That's it. That's all we, that's,
So wherever it ends up, if that becomes an issue, we'll have to address it.
well, the marina is where the marina has been.
Well, it's gonna move based on, you know, it's gonna be locked in.
It should not move down at that end.
that way, because it
That
already,
that is not, in
That's not an issue.
that's not the issue.
But that's been floated, so if it ends up getting pinned out further, we don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? I'm sorry, any other questions? Craig?
as part of that, so that would mean you're doing the gangway, the new gangway and all that, adjustments to the
The
top.
gangway, during the construction, the pier itself would be demolished.
Yeah,
It would be relocated, rebuilt. The new gangway would attach itself to the concrete seawall.
right,
And actually, the seawall would be shored up and the repairs made to, I think there's 2 sections that need repair.
right.
Um,
And that was, I was just asking to make sure that was part of the.
Yeah, and we're also hoping that when this is all done, that either the gangway will slide one way or another, so that it is more of a perpendicular, you know, in line with the pier itself.
Right, okay.
And then all the cables and wires would then be adjusted, and repairs made to the whole electrical system.
So when you're doing that to the electrical system, right, do you have to do it to all the docks too, or you're just talking about the system up top where you kind of,
I believe,
distribution system?
because they'd be getting into the electrical system,
Yeah,
that it has to be brought, because in years past, the whole marine's been taken apart, put back together, and I've gotten every location of the electrical system. I think the way the wiring instructor's viewing it is, it needs to be brought to code.
okay.
And then you have to go to GFCI, and I think it's 10 million amps.
Yeah,
And I have my own concerns with it's, you know, far too sensitive, and I'm gonna have a lot of people that can have both tripping breakers on the floats. You know, I was speaking with Al Reynolds today, and he believes that code regulation may be repealed and kind of drawn back a little bit.
yeah, do you think there's any way you can get a stay on kind of keeping it the way it is until it gets vetted?
Possibly.
Yeah. So the reason I ask is because it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to upgrade all the electrical infrastructure on the docks if you have a plan over the next few years to replace those floats. And then,
Well, we can just, I actually went to the Newport Boat Show a year ago, and I met with Siemens
yeah,
and Eaton, the Siemens or Eaton, I think it's one of the
yeah,
same.
and does the pedestals,
And
right?
they put pedestals, and they actually have a retrofit kit. So what would happen, the electrician would go in, open up the pedestal, disconnect the wires, and there's 4 screws that hold the breakers in place, and 4 screws that hold the twist locks in place. They would be removed, put back in, screwed back in place, and they just make a reconnection. And at that time, we probably go to LED lighting in the pedestals as well.
Mhm.
Nice. Anything else, Mike?
Nope, that was it.
Okay. Great.
That's awesome.
Any other questions? Dave?
No, I think that's great, great news.
All right. So Steve, you want to, on the dinghy policy, since I actually put that in, that was a follow-on because Dave at the last meeting had asked on the waiting list that we have today, and we're going to move instead to a sign-up similar to the way we do this, the
Yeah,
slips.
and I forwarded you over all the information.
Yes, so we have 234,
274.
234, I believe the number was, on,
On the list.
we have 234, correct. Mike has been reaching out and contacting them, we've gotten no response. So the goal here is to, for ease of the office there, to create a little more order and less havoc was to move to the same type of program as the slips have today. So the existing dinghy holders, just keeping everybody back up to date, dinghy hold, the people with the dinghy spots today would be grandfathered in. And then any new openings, et cetera, people would sign up and it would be awarded and then repeat the following year, as opposed to maintaining it like a mooring list.
And if we get no response, I think the issue should, be dropped off.
Yes, yeah, your bad phone
Can't
number,
keep
bad,
calling that,
No.
you know.
waste of time.
Yeah.
How many total dinghy spots do we have?
Did he put that in?
He did not.
Yeah, we only have a total number on the list.
There's probably no set number on that.
Yeah, because it depends on,
Loosey goosey?
well, it depends on,
It's just-
inflatables take a little bit more room than, than a 6-foot dinghy.
So who decides, in May of one year, who decides there are 5 more spots this year?
You kind of do it based on kind of how much room.
Is it full now? So it's always somebody leaves. There's somebody who could.
Yeah.
But it's very frustrating, like, to, be reaching out, calling these
Waste of
people,
time.
and they're not even calling back.
And I agree, and I think the process is good. I think the only thing I'm worried about with the whole thing is that if people are on the list that have been on for a long time, if they don't get some sort of notification in advance that it's moving and changing.
Well, again, I have everybody separated, in constant contact, so anybody that has given us an email, we are able to reach out to them via email. I sent out a notice that, heavy rains, and I sent it to, more people and some people.
I saw that, that was good, yeah.
So we are able to reach out to some of them, but not necessarily all of them.
If they haven't given you good contact information, it's their issue, sorry. Put it on the website.
I was thinking about that. One of the solutions could be that we post it on Steve's website, where people would normally go to look for this.
And in the harbor master's office for those that, walk.
Wallpaper all over the place.
You got it,
Perfect.
front door.
So we may post it on the website.
And that, I've been thinking about this a little while, and, still trying to go through an old list. Maybe we push something that the assignment of things is going to be changing. If you're on the list today, you have until August 1st to re-sign up and say you want to, and we'll figure out the way you go
Based
on
on
the list.
this,
If we don't hear from you,
you're up.
Yeah, that might be a good way to do it, that's fair, so people.
and that way it gives the people that are on the list time to get in, time to,
So when can you post that, Steve?
we put it up anytime.
It'd be great if you could post before the marina closes, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay?
Good idea.
Well, the people that are existing get their spots back.
Just a list.
Yeah, they get
Just
the
a list.
Yeah,
I'm just
I'm just thinking there's a lot more reason for walk-ins while the marina's open versus, right, once we close
But
and full.
but we have it until August 1st, and, and then we open up the dinghy wait list on the same day as the slip wait list. And it's just, you come in on that day and just go to another page in the book and put your name in. But people that are already on that dinghy list, they can come in, and it will give us time to kind of figure out where they are and whether they want to stay on that list. It's just a thought.
It's good stuff.
I think it's a good way to do it, that way give people ample notice that it is changing.
It is changing, and, you need to be an active participant in the change.
Give us a decent email address.
Yeah.
We're taking off from us.
And we'll keep you,
Yeah.
in line, but if not, you just move on.
Are there any things over on this side?
Yeah.
Spots for 10, 15, something
So at least that many.
Yeah, probably 25.
So on the north side?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
It's-
And north side and then
like that? Yeah.
paralleling right along here.
So what do they request? They'd rather have one here or there, or how does that work?
Yeah, they can,
Yeah.
it's just like a slip. You can ask if you want to be at the Maritime Center, or you can ask to be a cold pack. Or first available, depending on, whether you care or not.
Okay. Dave, I think you had a question. I apologize.
No, I was going back to the other,
That's okay. We'll go back for you.
I guess it's how they're gonna, when they drive those pilings for the new marina, is the marina in place when they drive those pilings? What are they
I'm
driving?
not sure how they're gonna do it.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I mean, I know that thing, it doesn't move much, even, with the wind. if that, you know, even with all that windage,
Hmm.
it doesn't really move much. I was just more or less curious as to
I
whether you
don't,
put that in and then drive the pilings.
I think, we're gonna dismantle the marina similar to what we did last year, move across in, I think it was 200 feet at a time across the harbor and tie it up over here. They may ask us to bring back the mains, get those in place.
Sure.
And they may, you know, ask us to bring this section or this section and start building up. I don't know.
Because there was a couple stones, I know Tuck's bent the wheel up there on that stone.
The
that's on that
stones are all,
corner.
you know, if, part of the project is to remove the stones.
Okay.
That is one of the driving factors. That was one of the reasons they wanted the pilings, and I knew they want the pilings is because the stones take up a lot of square footage
Sure.
on the seabed. They want them out of there so that if eelgrass ever decided to grow back, it actually wouldn't have to go through concrete or granite or whatever the material is. And
Just-
once the chain out of the water, all that material would go.
Yeah, we've had guys pick up those chains too, in the
Yeah.
winter,
Yeah.
coming through there, so.
So
Just curious.
that's the plan. And we have original maps of where the stones were, and then we have some updated ones and some Bob Greek versions.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, thank you, Brian.
you're welcome. So no other questions for Steve? We'll move into old business. Any other questions? Great, old business. So I have to apologize, I left one item off, and I just want to give people an update on the MOU. Actually, I'm going to talk to Howie on this one. We've opened talks with Marshfield again, and the plan is to breathe some life back into this MOU process. So Howie, I don't know if you want to add anything to this?
No, I think you're pretty comprehensive. I met with Mike Mayo over there. Our plan is to pick up where we left off as far as the draft goes. I got the latest draft, and I talked to him a little bit about us, again, having a joint meeting with their waterways group, maybe in the next month or so, to reestablish discussions, because we have like things going on here with the dredging in the river, an ongoing request for funds and grant money. It would behoove us probably to do that in unison with them and make sure that we're all rowing the same way in the boat. So I got the latest draft, and I delivered a copy of that to Jim Boudreau yesterday, and we'll take it from there.
Great. Questions? Okay, so aquaculture, I'm not sure if anyone besides Steve and Howie either watched or were at last night's meeting, the Board of Selectmen meeting, but there was an aquaculture conversation where both Mike DeMayo and Steve spoke with the board about the process moving forward. And what I had done was just to make sure that the Board of Selectmen was fully updated as to the waterways. I sent them a letter, you guys would each take copies, I'm sorry. I sent a letter which basically summarized where we had been in our meetings dating back to March as an old board, and moving forward, including Franny's email that went to the Board of Selectmen that talked about where we what we had learned, not only from economic benefits, environmental benefits, but also the fact that when we looked at the surrounding towns, for example, Provincetown and many of the other towns, Falmouth, Dennis, etc., that they all had shellfish advisory boards. I know Mike and I, for a while, were working on this, we reached out and spoke to some of these folks as well, understood the scope of the responsibilities in terms of putting together rules and regulations and meetings, and came to the conclusion as an old board that what made the most sense was for the town to have, or our recommendation would be to have the town have an advisory committee. So, shellfish, correct. and separate from the waterways, right? So it seems that in most of the towns, that the standing positions of the harbor master and the shellfish constable, and then there's 3 to 5 independent people who are appointed, similar to all of us with the exception of Steve, obviously. So that was our recommendation, and that was the letter I sent into the town. Howie and I, I'm sorry, sent into the board of selectmen. They were obviously on the same page before we had gotten to that, but I wanted to make sure that they were aware of our positions as well. At last night's meeting, and Howie, I know you were attending it, I watched it on replay. Mike and Steve spoke about the need to have some type of process in place. And Steve, I'll actually let you summarize where
Well, I just,
we are on that.
I mean, there's a large upside to shellfish in the town. Branding, it's, the environment, shellfish clean up the waterways, it's economic, it does create jobs, not a million jobs, but a job's a job. But there's a lot more that goes into it, you need to zone it so that you're not making it so that you can't have any recreation and it's just for farming or it's just for commercial. You need different areas, and those areas may, overlap and, you move it. Similar to, but I think what Falmouth did is probably one of the better ways where they make it, for farming here, and then they move it and make the farming over there. There's also their performance requirements, where they're not just giving out a grant because it's $25, and, Stephen Moore Oyster Company is tying it up because he also owns, Stephen Moore Oyster Company in Mashpee, and he doesn't want competition. So just because you have a grant doesn't mean you can just sit on it, you have to perform. If you don't perform, then we need to be in the position where we can exercise and say, we're taking the grant back, and we'll assign it to somebody else that is willing to perform.
Do you know how many acres are available?
No, that's all gotta, we have to kind of take a look, survey it, and work with DMF on that as well.
It doesn't seem like there's that much acreage.
No, but there's different areas, and at some point, huh?
It was more than we thought when we looked at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's the area outside of Cohasset Harbor,
Yeah,
that's
that's
actually
Scituate.
Scituate Water, yeah, it's actually Scituate Waters that's been conditionally approved by DMF for a year.
No, that's year round, but that is approved.
It is,
Cohasset is approved,
yeah.
Scituate Harbor itself is prohibited.
So Mike, the area of NB10, which is the Cohasset Harbor, our side of it,
Yeah.
that is approved. And then there's open ocean areas that are also approved, right?
Barring any red tide.
Yeah.
Because red tide comes in, it closes everything.
Right, yeah.
So Steve, how did the meeting go? How did
Well,
the selectmen,
Well, actually, if he would mind speaking, I see Sean in the back in an easy chair, we may be putting him to sleep.
it was,
Sean, you could ask your input on this?
Yeah, it was a late night last night, so I took the comfortable chair. But selectmen couldn't be in more of an agreement. Everyone's all excited for different reasons, from educational, there's a small economic component to it, but that's marginal. It's more, like Steve said, branding. And while you guys were having this discussion, it just reminded me, you might want to compare this to the brewery in Greenbush. I just think, a few years ago, a lot of people didn't realize that would fly. What would be better to go to any one of our restaurants and have, shellfish that have been harvested from these areas. I think it's a great thing. The only thing I'm not quite sure about is what Craig just mentioned, how much acreage there is and accessibility to it. Mike Lane was in the audience last night, Scituate resident, but a lobsterman in Cohasset. And if anyone knows Cohasset Harbor, it's him. And he didn't seem to think, he didn't speak up. that if there was might be a question of getting access to these areas where these guys propose to do it. So the board is, quite excited, very excited about it. Just want to develop, I think it was Stephen and the harbor master, Mike DeMeo, to form a charge for this commission. And then, once that's drawn up, form the commission and go full steam ahead. I did ask a question, and I don't know if I really got the answer to it, and David Dolphin would probably know the answer, but, so I asked last night, Stephen, if areas are conditional, so in other words, they're seasonal, that they could be open, how's that any different than digging steamers, because their flats are open or they're closed?
Because what happens is, in the summertime, you have a lot more
Right.
fertilizer in the water,
Right.
a lot more nitrogen in the water, and DMF comes down and they test it, and they may deem it as, over the years, as contaminated during this time, but then they have the shoulder months.
Okay.
So during the shoulder months, you don't have as much nitrogen in the water. The shellfish have the time to kind of clean themselves out, rejuvenate, get healthy again. The water temperature also drops, which helps as well.
And that's exactly what I thought. So why couldn't these guys that are proposing this, these businesses, why couldn't they just leave their product in the water until those colder months? And that's, a question for DMF, I guess,
I think they have to, they may have to move them to different areas, and that's something else DMF would have to decide.
And the reason I ask is because that might just open up more areas, okay? So maybe you could go down where David's place is down,
Right.
and,
But again, it's access. It's still, trying to get access to those areas.
Yeah, but, for those that didn't see the meeting, everyone couldn't have been more enthusiastic about it, something new, it's just an asset to this town that, untapped asset.
Yeah, Sean, the board, I know we're talking individually to all the board members. We're all very excited about it. We'd love to, tonight is Dollar Oro night, or Dollar Oyster Night at Oro, and they run out. So Jamie and John, we need you guys to come up with Scituate oysters.
Hopefully we can.
Right?
One of my concerns is, just having a big mess out there.
I understand, yeah.
That's
a good concern.
It's a huge concern because I'm gonna be the one stuck cleaning up your mess. I'm not saying yours,
We're more
but.
creative on that. I keep a clean house myself.
But you understand what I'm
Absolutely.
concerned with. I've
Yeah.
seen messes.
Yeah.
And I just, again, it gives us a reason to kind of revoke.
You mean like equipment left there and all that?
Yeah, I mean.
Crates and all that stuff?
I would think being able to have fines and control.
One farmer in Mashpee would just dump all the stuff at the boat landing, and I'd be down, and I'd be like,
Via?
you can't even get a boat to launch.
This is supposed to be a sustainable operation, so that, like, we don't leave it as we found it, we leave it better than we found it.
You understand?
Jamie Davenport,
Address?
16 Booth Hill Road.
But there's, there may be multiple people that come in for these applications, and we have to have, safety nets in place to prevent
Absolutely.
the problems from occurring.
It's a great idea, so that the commission will deal with it.
So,
Yeah, we're very enthusiastic about it.
you also have to kind of know the business. It's not an easy business. I've done it. It's not fun. It's not neat.
I think it's
You guys
fun,
think it's fun,
personally.
yeah.
It's
You
worth
guys
it.
love it for it.
We don't think being a harbor master is fun either.
Right.
Obviously.
Okay,
Someone
Steve.
signed up.
I was just, so speaking of messes, I was in Steve's office today, but we'll just leave that one alone for now. David?
Dave Goffney, South Scituate. I worked with Division of Marine Fisheries and Mike DeMeo and the Scituate Harbor Master when we opened up the South River. We did consecutive, I think it was 5 years of continuous water testing. And that opened up some 200 acres of shell fishing from the South River that had been closed for, I think it was 20 or 25 years. So I think you're seeing a lot of benefit to the rivers and the cleanup, and And honestly, over the years, the hope and the goal was to make the rivers not conditionally approved, to make it approved year-round. So, and I think as the water quality tests come in and they're leveling out, I think you're seeing a more improvement. And then again, the addition of what goes on, the more shellfishing that goes on, the more harvesting, it all has a benefit to that, so.
Great. I took the shellfish constable course two and a half years ago. It was 2 weeks long down in Mass Maritime. It basically wasn't a constable course, it was a growing course. And that could be potentially one of the requirements, just so the growers understand the importance of keeping it in the oil, keeping it refrigerated, knowing where it's coming from.
The state's very involved in that. My name's John Tedeschi, for the record, Jericho.
I spoke to DNF while I was taking the course, and one of the reasons Scituate Harbor itself is prohibited is because Scituate did not have a full-time shellfish constable. They had a gentleman that worked very hard. He since retired, but he was not full-time. He was a full-time teacher, and he was a shellfish constable. Did a great job, but they wanted to know that if a closure had to take effect, it could take effect immediately. It wasn't, they didn't have to wait for somebody to get out of school or because it's public health.
Oh, yeah.
It can go bad really fast.
Well,
So, with all the changes we made in Scituate Harbor, with, the pump-out boats, the pump-out station, the catch basins, they may come in and they may, conditionally approve Scituate Harbor. And you potentially have other areas that are actually in the harbor that could be opened up to grow. Okay. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
I've been working, I know you came to my office, I think it was the third hour I was here.
A couple of years ago.
Yeah, but I've been working on this, it's just one of the other projects, one of the many projects I've been working on since I got here.
If I may speak, Jamie Davenport, 16 Booth Hill Road. My thought was that that's all great that Scituate Harbor hopefully can be, and the rivers can be used in the future. I just felt like with Cohasset Harbor being open, it was possible for us to get up and running and then kind of branch out, as we go along. And I've been farming for 11 years, so I've got a lot of experience, and I'm willing to mentor, anybody who wants to learn, basically, with, the rising tide lifts all ships, right? So, and speaking towards everybody trying to keep best management practices, there's a lot of publications online. There's the East Coast Growers Association, the Mass Aquaculture Association, and they've spent a lot of time trying to put publications out there that people can read, even if they haven't taken a course like that. Although I do think that's a great idea, to make sure that people, know what they're doing and don't make a mess of things.
And understand what Vibrio is.
Exactly, yeah.
And what warm water does.
Right, and I asked,
I actually last week went down to Jamie's farm and was quite impressed. And I'd highly recommend that anybody on the board maybe take that opportunity to go check it out and maybe even eat a couple of oysters. But it really is interesting. They, fortunately, where they are, they're in Dennis, and they actually can drive the vehicle right to the farm, which is quite nice. We have a bit of a different situation where we hopefully will farm, and there's a couple of accesses. One of them is the creek that comes up in behind mine. There's some town-owned property that may work. It has to be high tide, but that would be okay because
there's a launch right there.
Yeah, and then we've spoken to the harbor master in Cohasset, and there doesn't seem to be any issues in coming in through Parker Ave as well. And those are really, I think, the only two spots we've checked into. There are others, but not many. Certainly, you don't want to take the ride around to Scituate Harbor. It wouldn't work. I think there's 45 minutes allowed.
Yeah.
I think it's 45 minutes, and they have to be in a slurry of ice and salt water. And that's all state regulated.
I can almost guarantee that if Wes has made Cohasset Harbor, that her access will allow.
No, I'll bet, and I don't know how their attitude's gonna be about it anyways, because I think they feel,
I'm not sure of myself.
yeah, that could change.
As far as the mess being made, so the nature of this being an intertidal area, and at high tide, there's like 6 or 7 feet of water, at low tide, it's left high and dry. The oysters pretty much have to come out by like the end of December. So the stormiest months of January, February, and then like the beginning of March, they're hibernating on land somewhere. So the only thing that's left out there are any apparatus that needs to stay because it's like semi-permanent, like structures that have been driven into the sand. But everything else, metal cages, the oysters themselves are all taken off, so it's really been minimized.
Yeah, I understand all that, it's just, when people, we had an issue with a pretty well-to-do family down in Populesset that actually tried to have, restrictions put in place so that nothing like aquaculture could ever be done.
Yeah.
So Stephen, as a result of last night's meeting, next steps are for, if I understood right,
Myself
You
and
and
Mike to work together to come up with a charge for what the Shellfish Committee, similar to what Waterways' charge is to do. And that would, the charge would be to put those regulations and requirements in place.
and the plan was for them, for that group or you to come back to us in November.
Yeah.
We'd review that and then.
And then we would go to the selectmen
in December.
in December, and then they would accept it. I believe they would then accept applications to interview potential board members.
Okay, so that process hasn't been established yet, so we really shouldn't go too far on that one. So if there's anything we can do, because obviously, 30 days is a lot of days, but really it's gonna be pretty quick.
It's really not that many.
I mean, it really isn't, especially since you may be closing a marina or two in the meantime. If there's anything that the members of the Waterways can do, I'm sure we'd love to volunteer Craig. No, any one of us. Any one of us will help in whatever way we can, okay?
Thank you very much.
Great, okay. If I can move on to the next subject area, I emailed out to the team financials that I received from Nancy Holt. I believe that we have some, here we go, some additional copies. So the DOR completed their audit of fiscal year 18 and it's closed. The great news is we finished with retained earnings of $676,000. Thank you, guys. Thank you. So, everyone, copies?
Financials?
So I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Is that what that says?
Well, that's what you said. So $676,000, very healthy. That's actually up from the past couple of years. Overall, fiscal year 18 was a good year. Revenues were up and expenses were up a little bit, but it certainly is very sustainable at these rates. Before this, we had flat to flat revenues effectively, but much more importantly, the expenses were really climbing. So now the expenses have been tempered. When we look at the budgeted expenses for the current year that we're in, fiscal year 19, they seem to be spiking. We've already tracked some of this to an estimate on electrical for running the de-icers, which looks like it may be vastly overstated, so these numbers should change significantly on the second line on the purchase of services. So,
We just didn't want to be short.
So what we plan on doing obviously is staying on top of this with some quarterly to date numbers to find out how we're tracking. But for now, the fund is healthy. The ratio between revenue and expenses is good. And we do have some significant capital projects in the offing that we need to account for. We do have declining debt service related to not only the eventual end of the mortgage on this building. I believe we have 2 notes tally on this, one that expires, I think, in 22 and one in 25, or within a year or so on that. So that would, one note is about 70,000, the other note I believe is about 25,000, if I remember my math correctly, so that would pull down almost $100,000. Eventually out of this, we have to account for the fireboat, which will bring in which will add in $40,000 in debt service, as well as the North River dredging project, which I believe is about $15,000 or $17,000 a year. So overall, what's been identified is what's coming off, what's being added to is a wash, and we remain healthy on this. But I know Dave and I have been working on this, Howie as well, so hopefully maybe we can circle back up, to create a task force on this, to look at the revenue, to make sure that it tracks accordingly throughout the year, so we can make appropriate recommendations, not only on the expense side, but the revenue side, right? Because if there's anything we can do to increase top-line revenue, obviously the simplest lever is slip fees, but there's others that we can look at, I think, as well, some marketing programs that may be able to grow revenue inorganically, as opposed to simply increasing footage expense, so to speak, in the slips. So, I'm not sure if you guys have had a chance to digest this. Obviously, you only recently got it because I only got it from Nancy recently. But if there's any questions anybody has right now, Dave, I'm sure you do.
I have a bunch, but I mean, just the concept is the timing is perfect, because I think, Steve, you just submitted or will be submitting your budget, right, for next year.
My capital plan.
Your capital plan, your capital plan isn't what,
No, the budget has not been submitted
but
yet.
next month?
They'll be releasing the documents for us to start working on. We've already started working on it in our office.
Right, so and that's on the expense side.
Correct.
Our recommendations can certainly be on the expense side of that, but on the revenue side, it would just be a suggestion for next, if we're thinking about changing anything on the revenue side, fees-wise, that would have to be by the February letter or something, right? For all the
That is
slip
correct.
overs and.
So what we do need to do is overlay. I asked Steve this afternoon if the capital planning information I had for fiscal year 19 was accurate, because in it we had some rather significant things, and he indicated no, there's some.
Some of them have been removed and some have been added.
Right, exactly. So the dredging has been added in,
Yeah.
right, and other things have been taken away.
Shellfish consultant has been removed.
Removed. That was a placeholder anyway, right?
Yeah.
That was never an intent.
And most of the capital items, when they're entered in, I'm entering in such that I'm seeing down the road, and everything changes. There was also a small boat before to be added. We've since added that boat. We did it through an insurance settlement. We had a motor. We had a trailer for it, and we just had to make up the difference, and we did that out of our budget.
So what we need to do is get a clean 5-year plan, right? Obviously, the important years are going to be 19 and 20 for short term. No matter which way I ran these numbers, for 19 and 20, the fund still is in good shape. So there's not so to speak, a sword hanging over our head to do something immediately. Not saying that that's not a lever we can pull, but for right now, the fund is healthy. We do have some significant capital plans, specifically the dock replacement.
Yeah, the 6 mains at Cole Parkway should probably be replaced during this project, and that was not, part of the project. That was.
Is that the 250 or is that the 350?
No, that is a capital item for this year for 68,000.
What is the
That
250?
did not get approved. The 68,000.
It's for this year.
This is current.
Current, yeah, capital.
So we're in fiscal year 19 right now,
Correct.
okay?
So it'll be for fiscal year 20.
So
So the docks that we have today, we go back in and be in place. And if we
And
need
go
to,
first.
we have new docks built and we just remove them and replace them.
okay. One of the big numbers on this is the $250,000 dock.
200, that is a.
And that moves the needle when we bring it in or move it out, right?
Yeah.
There's, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe there's 3
There's
placeholders in that,
There's 4. It's $1 million project,
okay?
approximately.
I only saw 3 on the 5-year plan, maybe I was.
One's further out.
Oh, okay. So there's 3, and it's almost like every other year?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
And
they're
if you can tell us, because I know I've had some questions with some of the members here, what's the compelling event to have to replace that? Is it the electrical 9-inch?
You know, there's a lot, the docks are too low, they're right on the borderline of, it depends on your measuring tape, whether they're compliant or not.
And by that you mean the electrical?
Electrical connections are too close to the water.
Okay.
If you
So I'll ask a naive question. Is there any way the electrical service can be lifted up an inch? So naive, I'm just asking.
Yeah,
Okay.
not that would make any sense. The docks themselves have been taken apart and put together so many
The
times.
stringers, I know they're in good shape.
They were, if I brought you down there, I had myself and Bob Reed lift up some boards, we could show you areas that the pressure treated wood is just completely rotted out, there's nothing left. We pick them up and they just
And
fall
that, and
apart.
that's with, you know,
And
years ago,
twisted.
they were taking them apart in the wintertime, replacing and sistering outboards on the inside of it, and kind of putting it back together, but each year we've had the docks separate on the main float from the other sections, just because it's pulling apart. There's not enough good wood.
The T, which is the outermost dock
Yeah.
on the north end of the marina, last year, all the stringers and the mains cracked all the way across. We had to run 2 boats holding the marina in place while my staff took out the stringers under load with all the boats in the middle of the summer. We had no way of getting the boats off the docks and replace all those boards in place.
So,
We did that, and then this year, again, it started to break again. We went,
Well, those were the first ones to go.
right.
we since came back, John Happy works for me, he's also on the welding company, he actually brought down some steel, and we then situated up with steel, it is holding, but these docks, the way they're put together, the chain stone system holding them together, different wind directions, different currents going on, everything's just, it's working against, it's all working against each other, and
Okay.
there's
So what I'm
just
clearly,
not
what I'm
much.
clearly hearing you say is these have a lot of value to somebody else.
They have value to some.
Do they really? Do they really?
Yeah, there would probably be a private marina that would probably buy, because it's a whole lot less expensive for
Place to float.
you as a private, company to, hire your staff in the winter, pull them apart and rebuild them, versus us, hiring contractors at the prevailing rate to start tearing stuff apart, putting things back together, or,
Okay.
But some of the good news here is that after the pilings are in, you're gonna have a lot less movement.
there's a lot less.
You should get you might get.
I might get a little bit more time, and that's why we were able to do it in sections. And we're also looking at, possibly a redesign to up the marina, down the road, we could change the layout of the inside circle. Maybe get more boats in there. I don't know. So it's all just things down the road that we're looking at.
So when is the first of the float replacement, the 250, the big number? Is that 20 or is that
That would probably be 20 or 21.
20 fiscal year,
Yeah.
right?
And we may be able to push that out a little bit if we replace the floats. The mains at 68,000
Fiscal year.
Possible.
Got it.
But again, budget-wise, for
The
our
other,
analysis is, if you assume anything, every other year or something on those 250s. You just have to see, will this level of revenue.
What it supports, right, because every year, when I went back and looked from 12, even though this shows 13, but I started this when we still had access to 12, there's about $200,000 in expenses, which I don't want to say are unanticipated, but get pulled in. For example, the dredging, right? That, or for example, your electrical, I think we had to come up with additional money last year for the electrical that wasn't foreseen. So there's always some unforeseen monies, and they're usually in tranches of like $50,000 and $60,000. But when you add them up, obviously, it's real dollars here. So
And I'd also be probably applying for a Seaport grant
on the 250,
on the $1 million project, so it would potentially be one $200,000 or $250,000 project, or maybe to do it all at once. Or it might be, I go in, ask for, get a better quality system, ask for half of it, and then ask for the second half.
so if we had Chucker and Dave tie their boats up, we could apply for a commercial.
Yeah.
Perfect.
There's one other thing that I think is worth mentioning too, is that, remember the original design, when we were here with the engineers, and they talked about building hoops into
Yes.
the docks, and we said, boy, that's gonna be a lot of labor to take apart the docks while they're in the water and build these channels in to kind of contain the island, right? That was deemed at one point to be not really a viable option, right? So the option then becomes to have the docks outside of the pilings, so the pilings will be probably in some of the slip spots, right? Which could be a challenge, but we don't know about that yet, so alternating.
We just don't know what it's gonna be like once we get,
So there'll be a chain around the pilings to
Right.
the docks.
Obviously, it's floating up and down.
Yeah, to float up and down with itself, but ultimately, he's gonna need to replace those docks as it is, because he needs to get to the point where they actually have that enclosed hoop as part of
at that point, like, change the pedestals from the hourglass pedestal to, like a stainless steel type pedestal,
Yeah.
something that
Mhm.
can survive it doesn't break apart.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot of people.
So what we really need to do
A lot of
is,
people hit.
we just need to get updated information from you, Steve, overlay it on these, make some
Yeah.
assumptions on revenue growth, expense growth, and see what kind of situation we're in, because we want the fund to obviously remain healthy and stable for the budget.
We're not sure what Seaport's gonna do. Whether they're gonna continue on with this, or they're not, and that's why I didn't wanna go, go to the well for something for $50,000 or $60,000. Because they're like, well, you were just here last week.
Right. Okay.
I'd rather go and ask for what we truly need, which what really makes sense to spend, it's gonna potentially cost us a lot of money.
Okay, any other questions on the expenses?
Good job, Brian, that's great.
On the board? I think the audience had an opportunity to look at it. Any questions from the audience? Rick, did we wake you up? Thanks for being here, by the way, appreciate it. All right, so moving into new business.
Brian, just before we do that,
Yes, sorry,
all under old business from last time, we talked about a master permitting process.
that is correct on the master dredging. I mean, comprehensive dredging plan with the master permitting, right?
Master permitting, have we?
I spoke to our engineer that's working on this project, and he gave me a preliminary cost estimate. I, entered in a figure that I felt comfortable with, and that would be to permit Scituate Harbor, the North River, and the Heron River, all under one comprehensive permit. So we're not buying 4 different permits, and we're not maintaining 4 different permits, and not trying to recall when all these different permits have to be updated. So it would be under one master plan. So if and when we needed to dredge, a maintenance dredge over by the log line, or over here, or in one of the channels, we can do it. We have the permit in place. And it could potentially work to our benefit, because if we had this permit in place today, and they were dredging the South River, you could probably pretty easily, if you had a little bit of extra money, and it was just a small project where they come down for a day or 2 or 3 days, and dredge it,
Maintenance.
Permit in hand,
Repairs, or
just say, here's a
Whether
contract,
it's-
how much is it gonna be, here's a contract, and they come in, they may, it benefits them because they're already working on a much larger project, and they just, work it
So I
out.
guess my question is, what do we do next? What's the next step?
The next step is to make part of my capital plan, which I have put in on my capital plan, line item number 2 or number 3. And that, get that, hopefully go to town meeting, get that approved, have that go out and, assign an engineer to get this plan put in, approved and put in place. The only hiccup is if chemical testing is required. Now, Scituate was not a big industrial, their DuPont was not down here throwing battery acid into the harbor, so I don't know if that's really gonna be a big issue.
Would that be a reason they couldn't combine the areas? Is that what you mean?
No, it cost.
And
Cost of engineering.
From time.
It could be another $150,000 or $200,000.
Can you throw out the number that he gave you, just to give them an idea?
I put in $100,000.
Not outrageous.
Okay. So that would go before the town meeting?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
hopefully it
Hopefully it makes sense.
Through capital.
it's got to go through capital plan and everybody else, but I
Right.
think, from our conversation, Waterways was
Yeah.
pretty on board with this.
100%.
Yeah.
Also-
Makes a lot of sense.
So we all understand that Governor Baker's office put up $50 million for dredge projects that are shovel ready. That's a 50-50 split. So if we did have even a few items in here that need to be done, if we came up with our match,
Done.
you have a much better shot of walking in and getting the money from the state now than they didn't have the money before.
Hopefully that'll be for this time next year.
And it's in, money's gonna be in $10 million increments over the next 5 years. We just got,
opportunity for Seaport Economic
Yeah.
Grant.
we just got another,
Absolutely.
that's where the money from, the South River came from, $500,000, $555,000.
And I know
And
that,
that's a much larger project than these 3 projects over here. And they were awarding projects that were $100,000. Well, down the Cape is pretty inexpensive to dredge because it's just sand and they take that nice clean sand, put it right on their beaches. This is a lot of muck, which is not really compatible with beaches.
okay. So, is there anything we can do to help you with this, Steve? Again, Craig, no, so if there's anything we can do to help you, we're all in on this one because obviously it's very important. It's important to the fishermen. Obviously, that corner over there is a very tight turn.
Yeah.
So, there's not a lot of water at certain tides, right?
Yeah, would that coincide with the piling situation?
No, because our pilot project hopefully,
Will be.
I'd like to see it done by May 13th.
But it might
I don't know what's gonna happen.
This money wouldn't be available until July.
But that money wouldn't even be available till, well, no, you're right up to town meeting because we have money in hand. We're a little different from everybody else.
I didn't know if you're on that corner, if you had a piling too over there, the dredging would disrupt the pilings in that corner.
No, because they'll just lift it, and they'll dredge around and we'll pull the piles out. But once it's permitting, it's getting the piles, pulling a pile out and grabbing it back in is not a ton. You don't want to do it 12 times, but you just let it back and say, oh.
Is there no problem okay?
Yeah, getting around the corner, yeah, we just can't, yeah.
Right there?
So, we're hoping that maybe that the de-icing will help your area as well. It seemed to work over here.
Another old business.
Coming out of the woodwork here.
No, just, something came up last meeting, I'm not sure if anybody's up on the, what's going on with that piece of property? Did CPC vote?
Yes, so
Put it on.
I can comment on that, yes. CBC, the Mary Jenkins property, they unanimously approved 6-0 to send it forward. They're with the, I believe they're with advisory tomorrow night. Thursday night, Mary Jenkins and Noah and the rest of the team. I know they also went before the Board of Selectmen, 2 meetings, not last night, but 2 weeks ago. And frankly, it'll be on the town election, so town meeting, I believe it will be on.
There's one last item, I got a couple of emails about it, and it's the repair of the jetty. That was an old project that was approved, I think, since
2 years ago.
I think it might have been prior to me getting, or just as I got here, it got approved. I think Mark had worked on it.
Yeah.
And that's to repair the nose of the jetty. The barge came in, drop off the mats, Tuesday, or Wednesday, yesterday. They came in, dropped off the mats, they left, they're coming back in with 3 loads of stone. They'll dump that in the water, and then at high tide, they'll remove it at low tide, place the stone, and just make repairs to bring that jetty back to its original condition. They will not be raising it, they will not be widening, you know.
We're talking about the inside, the harbor side.
No, the nose of the jetty, up by the,
So just the front edge?
yeah, the day marker that's out there. That's where the repair will take place. And then the barge will come back in, pick up the mats, and it'll be gone. So,
And never,
see it the other day, it stopped by the town pier, I don't know, if it went into refuel, and then it was gone.
in terms of any impact to either the commercial fishermen or recreational, none?
No, no,
Just fishing from
didn't even notice them.
Okay. Great.
When do they think that's gonna be done? Is it like a couple of weeks or is that?
Well, they originally said the first week in December,
Yeah.
but they lost a couple of weeks due to weather. So they're now still in December,
Yeah.
but they want to get it done. They're a good contractor. My understanding, they did the jetties out at Block Island. They turned out very well.
Who's paying for that?
Army Corps of Engineers. You own federal government.
Brian, I got a-
You are.
I got a question, kind of going back to that Jenkins property. I mean, it's really a shot in the dark. What's that property gonna be used for? I know they talk about a walking path and all sorts of stuff like that. In town, I know a big problem with most of the lobstermen in town is storing our gear. And we sit over here at the back float, we look at that bank across from the lobsterman's dock, and that's receding by larger and larger amounts. Basically, it's what we need to dredge. And we thought, geez, it'd be great if we could back in there at high tide and store gear there or something like that. It's just getting harder and harder to find areas in town that aren't developed where you can stack, 400, 600, 800 traps for the winter. Is there any way that we could get access to something like a piece of that land to store gear?
Well, this one I'm going to hand right off to Sean, because I'm not too familiar with CPC rules and regulations, but
It's a community preservation type deal. I mean, we're part of the community. I mean,
certainly are.
if it makes our life a little bit easier, I mean, it's kind of a Hail Mary,
Would
but
they be safe there?
I mean, I'm spending,
This is the last time Sean's going to come to one of these meetings.
No, that's a good question. It did catch me, you caught me by surprise, that's for sure. I would say off the top of my head, the quick answer would be no, because it would be purchased for open space and recreation. Dave,
if you
not
got
a bad
the
idea,
stuff,
but
if you got the stuff out of there by, April 15th or something.
I'd have to ask, the town administrator, but I would tend to think, no, just my guess.
I mean, there's a lot of these walking paths.
No, made a lot of sense.
It's a 3-foot path, got a whole heck of a lot
Maybe
of
we
area out there,
You could put
Maybe we
a
can make
Christmas
this
tree
happen.
out there for the winter. Put one of those big Christmas trees out there for
The trap tree.
The old
Yeah,
floats.
600 trap tree.
Get the old floats from the marina.
Okay.
I get 600 traps that are crushed over the town pier that I keep, every time I remove them and throw them away, there's 600 more.
Oh, we'll keep making them.
So I think that takes care of old business,
Yes.
right?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. So new business, we'll hit the hard one first, then go to the easy one. In terms of 2018 and 19 goals, what I was hoping that we could do is actually, each and every one of you guys to think about and come back to me before the next meeting so we can put it on the agenda. Some of the goals that we may want to aim for over the next year. Obviously, the comprehensive dredging is something that Steve's got and running with, but for example, whether it's mooring services or GIS or whatever, looking at the acquisition of some type of software tool that will not only help the harbor masters, but also give us the possibility of looking into regrading. And so those were some of the ideas that came to mind. Dave, I'm sure you have one or two.
Yeah.
You want to share them with us, or you're going to really?
No, I mean, that was important. We bantered about the harbor management plan, what we would do with that. We have the whole list of Dick Eckhouse's
Project board?
project action plan
Yep.
that I have a copy of. I could email to you.
That'd be great if you could circulate.
Yeah, just ideas. I haven't looked at it in 6 months, but it has a bunch of things on there that were, some are done, some may not be relevant, some might be relevant. They may percolate to the top, so it's at least a starting point of projects that maybe we could focus on.
Great, thanks.
So what we're asking all of us to do is just get back to you with an email that says, here's what I think the goals.
Some of the goals that we should do,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Some of the bigger ones, for example, not as simple, right?
Yeah.
So something that can change the lives of the commercial fishermen, the recreational boaters, make it easier, drive more revenue, top line revenue, as opposed to just raising fees, right? If we can figure out a way to do things to make Scituate Harbor more marketable.
An expansion of this facility, make it a little bit bigger, put a small kitchen in this facility so that the caterers can come in here and actually warm something.
There you go. So,
Maybe make it so that you can actually use
so I think there's,
it all
I
year
think there's at
long.
least one or two people that may have some familiarity with this building in terms of why, you know, what,
But it's up and running, it's making money, and, it's something that I think, again, we go back to Seaport, and they'd be more than happy to, do something to it.
Did he say crushed stone for the potholes?
he said that too. So it doesn't feel like you're driving into like
I use shells.
a bad part of Iraq?
Oyster shells, Scituate oyster shells.
Situation shells, we put them out there one at a time.
Right.
Put your name on them.
Okay. And then the last item that I wanted to bring up was meeting dates. One of the issues is the January meeting, I believe it's January 2nd is the first Wednesday. We know Dave's not going to be able to make it. He's still going to have his hats and horns on. So we may want to push that back a week to the 9th.
Sure. And I think I'll be
there's-
rearranging myself.
Right? There's a couple of other items. For example, I believe July 3rd is the first Wednesday as well, so the night before the 4th. So,
Why don't you propose and email us the dates? That'd be-
I'm going to.
Yeah.
right, so I'm going to come back with dates. If anyone, and again, I'm going to go to Sean on this one, so I want to give you at least some advance notice. And I believe that there's a policy that the town has that if people are remote, that they're able to call into a meeting and vote, but not present new business. Do you know if that's true, Sean?
It's so new, it hasn't been used yet, to my knowledge, in any of my liaison positions.
But
Certainly not.
have you heard of something like that?
Well,
We did
yes.
vote on it.
Selectmen, we did vote on it, I couldn't even tell you.
Yeah.
Markar's been pushing for this for quite a while.
Okay.
So, it's coming.
Great.
It's here, and I couldn't tell you.
No, because, for example, some people do go away over the winter, and I don't want to run into a quorum situation. If we could have them dial in, be registered, and be able to vote on certain items, and then obviously move, and then get off the phone, right? I know how we looked down in Vero Beach, you'd be bored to tears in February, and you'd love to call in.
I want to talk to you.
She's
fine,
Oh, okay. And we'll be at nowhere anyways.
That's
At
correct.
that point.
Yeah, I believe they do.
Don't forget that.
Thank you. All right. Any other items, anybody? Yes, Leanne?
I have a question. So did you guys move the January meeting to January book that room.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, it's moved. Would you like to vote on this?
No.
Good. No,
I think we need
I don't believe we have to vote on the
Okay.
moving date.
Perfect.
Okay? And any other dates, then we will
Yep.
establish them, okay? Thank you. Okay, then I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Thank you very much, everyone.